Dak Prescott, not so Big Ben Roethlisberger. It is NFL Live on this Thursday afternoon. I'm Dan Graziano. I am here today with this stellar crew: Louis Riddick, Tim Hasselbeck, and Jeff Darlington. We're going to get into all of this, starting with the return of Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott. You may remember that before fracturing his ankle in Week 5 last season, Prescott actually broke the NFL record for most passing yards in a 4-game span with almost 1,700. In fact, by the end of Week 6, which he didn't play in because he was hurt, he was still leading the league in passing yards. Of course, that injury cost him the rest of the 2020 season, but he's out on the field today with the rest of his team. And the Cowboys have said he is a full go for the start of training camp. So let's start with you, Jeff Darlington. What more can you tell us about the Cowboys and their plan for Dak this camp?
Well, Dan, we can start with what Dak Prescott said this offseason. Of course, optimistic players never necessarily indicating exactly where that player will be in training camp, but Dak said this offseason that he felt like he could play a game already if needed. Mike McCarthy, though, the head coach, saying that in the offseason they did put certain limitations on Dak. They do expect him to be full go for the start of training camp, also emphasizing if there are needs to pull him out of certain periods, they will do that. But they believe that Dak Prescott is good to go after having right ankle surgery in October to repair a dislocated and a compound fracture in that right ankle. So, Dan, all systems go for Dak Prescott.
That's great news. Obviously, eager to see him back out on the field and doing his thing. But, Tim, that was a pretty major injury. So, as he comes back from it, even if he is a full go, what kind of stuff are you looking for when you watch him out on the field?
Yeah, I think beyond that, it ends up being the mental aspect of coming back from an injury. I mean, many quarterbacks end up having left knee injuries because, when they step to throw, that's the knee that, the leg that gets rolled up on. And sometimes overcoming that is a bit of a hurdle. You may be cleared medically by the doctors, but where is your head when you have people around your feet? And that's what it would be for Dak. Like when a play breaks down and he has to take off and run, what does that look like? Is he... does he run the way he did, prior to the injury? Or is he more cautious? Is he willing to slide feet first or is he not? And so I think those are the things. Once you see that, I think you'll have a better understanding of where he is physically, but also where he is mentally coming back from this injury.
Yeah, Tim, those are great points. I mean, really, when you're looking at Dak, that's what you want to see. You want to make sure that really there's just no hang-ups or no reservations on his part as far as his ability to just cut it loose. And then in particular, I'll tell you what else I'm looking for with this team shifting away from the offense is the defensive side of the football, which is, although it doesn't have as much star power as the offense does, obviously, with Dak Prescott. The defense is going to be what ultimately determines just how well this team does this year. And it's really, to me, going to start in the middle of this defense with young Micah Parsons, drafted in the first round out of Penn State. This is the one individual outside of the quarterback who has to have a very real, tangible, impactful effect on this football team. He has to be the guy who really stirs the drink, so to speak, on the defensive side. And you're seeing it here in these highlights. He has to have a Deion Jones type of effect like Deion had for Dan Quinn in Atlanta. He has to have a Bobby Wagner type of effect like Bobby had on the Seattle defense up there in the Pacific Northwest. If he's not able to do that, if the 6 consecutive defensive draft picks that they drafted this year are not able to have a tangible effect on this team defensively, this team is again going to fall short of expectations, which, according to Jerry Jones and how emotional he was yesterday, simply are to get back to the Super Bowl. Not be better, not be above 500, not be competitive in the wild card round, get back to the Super Bowl. That's it.
I think it's a great point, Lou. When you talk about Micah Parsons, I was asked earlier this morning, most impactful rookie this season. I think you're on the money with Micah Parsons. If you think about this, there's a good chance, like day one, he's the signal caller. And you talk about like an epically bad defense a year ago. I think, maybe worst all time in terms of points, second all time in terms of yards for that franchise, in terms of what they gave up a year ago. Yeah, like he needs to be as good as everyone kind of thought he was going to be or could be for them to have a good enough turnaround where that defense can compete at a championship level.
Lots of pressure on the rookie, lots of pressure on the new defensive coordinator, Dan Quinn, there in Dallas to fix what was their biggest problem last year. Hey, the Cowboys are celebrating a birthday out there at training camp practice today. Star running back Ezekiel Elliott, he wore a helmet to practice, not that hat. but he turned 26 years old today. Just 26, feels like he's been in the league a while, and after last year's struggles, it can be easy to forget just how good he's been. The only players in NFL history to produce more scrimmage yards before turning 26, Hall of Famers Emmitt Smith and Walter Payton, who ended up ranking number 1 and number 2 on the league's all-time rushing list. So for more on Zeke and the Cowboys, we welcome in our Ed Werder, who's out there in Oxnard at practice. Ed, what's happening out there today?
Jerry Jones made Ezekiel Elliott the highest paid running back in football. Then he hired a head coach in Mike McCarthy who builds everything around the quarterback. So it's not a coincidence that Elliott, a two-time NFL rushing champion, played a diminished role and had the worst season of his career in 2020. Injuries to Dak Prescott and the team's best offensive lineman exaggerated Elliott's woes. I asked McCarthy today his expectations for Elliott this season.
He does so much more than just run the football for us. So he's a magnet full of energy. He's got so much natural leadership just in the way he goes about his business. So the production on the field is not a concern of mine. The production will be there with the opportunity. We have a clean start. Health is always a part of your success, and I think as long as we stay healthy, our success has a chance to be at a very high level.
Elliott reported here in excellent physical condition after spending the offseason working with Josh Hicks, a private running backs coach. Dak Prescott said this offseason that when Elliott's healthy and in shape, he's the best running back in football. And Elliott's proven that statement true in the past, but last season he led the NFL in one very dubious category. Elliott's 6 fumbles were the most in the NFL among non-quarterbacks, and McCarthy makes no excuses for that. Elliott cannot allow ball security to be an issue, Dan.
Thanks, Ed. Some news today on the NFL's continuing efforts to encourage their players to get vaccinated against COVID-19. The league sent a memo to teams this afternoon detailing procedures for handling COVID-relating scheduling changes, and some big stuff in here, including if a game is canceled due to an outbreak among unvaccinated players and cannot be rescheduled, it will be forfeited, with the team responsible for the outbreak being charged with a loss. Also, if a game is canceled, players on both teams will not receive their game checks for that week. And if you're vaccinated, you can return after you test negative twice. After a positive test, you can return after testing negative twice, whereas if you're unvaccinated, it's like last year where you still have to miss at least 10 days. This is not going over universally well among the players. Star wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins of Arizona tweeting, "Never thought I would say this, but being put in a position to hurt my team because I don't want to partake in the vaccine is making me question my future in the NFL." So, Lewis, thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think my issue with this, as far as people overall and their unwillingness to want to protect themselves and protect others, is this. Look, I'm a staunch believer in this science, and I'm a staunch believer in trusting people that have proven themselves to be credible to me as far as giving me sound medical advice all throughout my life. And I have leaned on some of those people in this instance when it comes to the decision to get vaccinated or get my family vaccinated and trying to protect them and protect myself. And they have presented me with credible scientific information as to the benefits and the risk versus reward, of getting vaccinated. On the flip side, when it comes to people who have decided not to get vaccinated from a scientific standpoint, the thing that I always have my ear to the ground in terms of trying to listen for is what is the scientifically backed reasoning as to why people are reluctant to get vaccinated, and what do they feel as though is not worth the risk of getting vaccinated. It's just not worth it to them. And that's something that I have failed to really at this point in time really hear laid out for me. And look, obviously it comes down to personal choice, and everybody has their reasons as to why they do or don't do it. But look, obviously right now the league is incentivizing players to make sure that they try and protect themselves and protect their teammates. And if not, if something goes wrong, it's going to cost them and they're going to have to suffer the consequences. And look, I don't necessarily see a problem with that. I really don't. I understand it puts some players in uncomfortable situations, and every player will react differently to this. But I just haven't heard a compelling argument on the flip side as to why people don't want to get vaccinated in that regard.
Yeah, and I think part of that, Lou, is people probably don't feel like they need to tell people why they're not getting vaccinated. But I would say this. I think what this does, DeAndre Hopkins' reaction, as well as some other players' reaction, gives you a glimpse into a little bit when numbers are released about 85% of these teams are valued